Welcome to Whispers in the Dark, where true horror stories will keep you on the edge of your seat. Tonight, we'll be diving into a series of terrifying tales, where the solitude of a dark night can lead to the most unimaginable horrors. Would you dare stay home alone after hearing these? Sit back, relax, and prepare yourself, as these stories might just make you rethink what truly lies in the shadows of your own home. Story 1: The Man in the Dark. Hi, I'm Susan Walters. I'm an ER nurse living in Portland, Oregon. I've worked in the medical field for over 15 years, and I've seen it all from gruesome car crashes to flatline resuscitations. But nothing has ever sent chills down my spine like the night I'm about to tell you about. It was September 2006. At the time, I was living alone in a small house in southeast Portland. My husband, Michael, had just left for what he called a stress relief trip to the coast. To be honest, things between us had been tense. We were sleeping in separate rooms, constantly arguing, and Michael had grown increasingly distant and cold. That evening, I had just finished a grueling 12-hour night shift at Providence Portland Medical Center. My body was on the verge of collapse. When I walked through the front door, the first thing I noticed was a handwritten note on the kitchen table. It simply read, "Sue, couldn't sleep. Had to get away for a few days. Gone to the beach." It didn't sound like Michael at all. Too polite. Too detached. But I was too exhausted to care. I just frowned, shrugged, and headed upstairs to bed. Right when I stepped into the house, something felt off. All the windows were closed, yet the air carried a foul, musty odor like old sweat and mildew. That smell had never been there before. Then I noticed the security system. It had been disabled. Michael was obsessive about home security. He would never leave it off. I stood frozen in the entryway, heart thumping louder than it should. The silence was unnerving. No TV. No hum from the fan. No sound at all. I began checking each room, turning on lights as I moved. Everything looked normal until I got to the downstairs storage room. There, I found something odd. The folding ladder had been moved. It was now propped upright against the wall, pointing straight toward the attic. A shiver ran down my spine. "Someone's been here," a voice inside me whispered. But like so many others in denial, I brushed it off. Maybe Michael moved it before he left, I told myself. Around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly. No sound. No lights. Just the gut-wrenching feeling of being watched. I sat up, clutching the blanket. My heart was pounding. Then I heard it. Soft footsteps, on the wooden floor downstairs. It wasn't a mouse. It wasn't the neighbors. I lived alone. And I knew that creaky sound. Those floorboards only groaned like that under a real person's weight. I quietly got out of bed and grabbed my flashlight. I tiptoed into the hallway. Just as I did, the hallway light flickered, and died. The house went pitch black. And that's when I saw him. A man. Dressed in black. Wearing gloves. Standing silently at the end of the hallway. He was holding a hammer. His eyes met mine, cold, empty, and utterly devoid of life. I didn't even think. I screamed and bolted toward the bedroom. I tried to slam the door shut, but he was faster. The hammer came down before I could lock it. I turned just in time. It struck my arm, sending a wave of pain through my body. Blood sprayed the wall. Driven by raw survival, I swung my flashlight into his face. He staggered backward, just long enough for me to escape the room. I ran. Blood trailed behind me with every step. He chased me room to room, floor to floor. The whole pursuit couldn't have lasted more than 5 minutes, but it felt like 5 hours of hell. Finally, I managed to throw him against the wall. I wrestled the hammer from his hands and struck back again and again until he collapsed, unconscious. Shaking, bleeding, sobbing, I called the police. When they arrived and cuffed him, one officer knelt beside me and said something that made my blood freeze. His name is Edward. He's a hitman. And the person who hired him is your husband, Michael. Michael had paid Edward $50,000 to kill me. The contract was handwritten, signed, and detailed. He didn't want a divorce, he wanted me gone, so he could collect the life insurance and escape what he called a suffocating marriage. I survived, but what followed was worse than death. I had to testify against the man I once loved. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But it didn't make me feel safe. Because for years after, I still felt eyes watching me. Every night, I slept with the lights on. Every creak in the wooden floor sent panic through my chest. I moved to a new city. Changed my name. Took self-defense classes. Carried pepper spray everywhere. But the fear never left. 3 months before Michael's parole hearing, he died of cancer in prison. And yet, the fear still didn't die with him. Sometimes, I still dream of Edward standing at the end of the hallway, those hollow eyes pouring into mine. And to this day, I still don't know what's more terrifying. The man in the dark, or the man I once called my husband. Do you think it's possible to ever truly know someone you live with? Have you ever felt like your home no longer belonged just to you, like someone else was there, watching? Share your thoughts and your stories in the comments. Who knows? One day, your story might be told right here. Story 2, The Shadow Behind. Hello everyone, my name is Emily Johnson. I work in media and live in Seattle, Washington. Recently, I decided to take a short break to enjoy some quiet time in my small home. My husband, Adam, had gone on a business trip for a few days, and I thought it would be a perfect opportunity to relax and do things I love without any interruptions. Little did I know, these peaceful days would soon turn into a nightmare. One night in November, after returning from a party with friends, all I wanted to do was crawl into bed and sleep deeply. The house was quiet, with no sounds except for the wind howling outside the window. Adam was away, and I thought it would be a quiet night. But that silence didn't last long. As I lay in bed, eyes closed, I started hearing strange noises coming from the hallway. At first, I thought it was just the house creaking, but then the sounds became clearer. It was as if someone was walking around inside. I sat up and looked around. The room was empty. I decided to get out of bed and check every room in the house. There was nothing unusual, just a cold breeze coming through the window. Maybe I'm just tired, I told myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Around 1 a.m., I woke up again. This time, the sense of anxiety was stronger. The lights outside the porch cast a faint glow through the bedroom window, but the house remained silent. Then I heard the footsteps again. Steady, slow, as though someone was pacing back and forth downstairs. I tried to ignore it, but the footsteps seemed to get closer and closer. Then, I heard a soft breath, like someone was standing just behind me. I turned around and stared into the darkness in the corner of the room, but there was nothing there. Only the cold, suffocating feeling of fear. Determined to find out what was happening, I grabbed my phone and tried to call Adam. No signal. Suddenly, I saw a dark shape dart across the room, moving quickly toward the hallway. I screamed, but my voice seemed to vanish into the silence. At that moment, my heart raced. A wave of terror washed over me. I rushed out of the bedroom, but there was no one there. The house was still dark. I was certain that someone was here. That feeling couldn't be wrong. The next morning, I checked the house again. Everything seemed normal. The doors were locked, and there were no signs of anyone having broken in. But the fear lingered. When Adam returned, I told him everything. He just laughed and said I must have been imagining things due to stress. But I knew something had happened. A few days later, I still couldn't sleep properly. Every time the night fell, I felt like someone was watching me from the shadows. Even though I tried to forget about it, that presence never left, and this house, no matter how well lit, always made me feel like someone was standing behind me. Was my story just a nightmare caused by being alone in the dark, or was there something strange truly happening? Have you ever felt an unexplainable presence in your house? Share your thoughts and experiences. Maybe you'll discover you're not the only one who feels uneasy when alone in the dark. Story 3, The Silent Watcher. Hi, I'm Rebecca Miller. I live in a small town in the Midwest, and I've been working as a graphic designer for about 5 years now. To be honest, I've always been someone who enjoys a little solitude. I didn't mind being alone, especially at night when the world seemed to slow down. I was used to the quiet, but nothing could prepare me for what happened that night. It was a Friday in February. My husband, Mark, had gone out of town for a work seminar. He was supposed to be back by Sunday evening, so I had the house all to myself. I was looking forward to a weekend of watching movies, reading books, and just enjoying the peace. But as the night wore on, that peace quickly turned into something much darker. It was around 10 p.m., and I was settled in the living room, working on some design work. The house was completely quiet. There wasn't a sound outside, and the only noise was the hum of my computer. That's when I first heard it. Footsteps. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, or maybe even the wind causing the floorboards to creak. But then it happened again. Slow, deliberate steps, one after another, coming from the hallway just outside the living room. I froze, staring at the door, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. Maybe it was just the house creaking, right? But no, this was different. The footsteps were too steady, too real. I tried to ignore it, focusing back on my work, but the footsteps didn't stop. They kept going, getting closer and closer. I felt my heart start to race. I stood up and cautiously moved toward the door. There was no one there. No one in the hallway. The house was empty. I thought maybe I was just hearing things. Maybe I was tired. But then I heard something else. Faint whispers, coming from the kitchen. I moved closer to investigate, my breath shallow. The whispers were so soft, I couldn't make out any words. But the feeling of being watched was unbearable. I glanced toward the kitchen, expecting to see something, or someone, but there was nothing. Yet, the whispers continued. And the air felt colder, thicker. At that moment, I heard a loud thump coming from upstairs. My heart nearly stopped. I knew no one else was here. Mark was still away, and the only other person who had a key to the house was my sister, who lived hours away. I grabbed my phone and dialed Mark's number, but there was no signal. Panic started to creep in as I slowly made my way up the stairs, trying to silence my own footsteps. The house felt oppressive, like the walls themselves were closing in on me. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard something move in one of the rooms down the hallway. I crept toward the door, which was slightly ajar. Then, without warning, the door swung open on its own. I stumbled backward, falling against the wall. Inside the room, I saw a figure standing by the window, silhouetted against the dim light from the street. It was a man, tall, thin, with dark, hollow eyes. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, watching me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The air was thick with terror. I turned to run, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. I ran down the stairs as fast as I could, slamming the door behind me. My breath was coming in ragged gasps as I dialed 911. The operator answered, and I explained what had just happened. But when the police arrived, there was no trace of the man. No footprints. No signs of forced entry. The house was exactly as it had been before. They told me it was probably a figment of my imagination, that I was exhausted or maybe just scared. But I knew what I saw. I knew what I felt. Mark returned on Sunday evening, and I tried to explain to him what had happened, but he didn't seem to take me seriously. He suggested I was just overthinking things, but deep down, I could feel that something was terribly wrong. Even now, months later, I still feel it. Every time I walk into the house, I have the nagging sensation that I'm not alone. And every night, I feel like I'm being watched. The figure in the window is still there, silently waiting for me to notice him again. Do you believe in things we can't explain? Have you ever felt a presence in your home that you couldn't shake, no matter how hard you tried? Share your thoughts and experiences with us. Who knows, maybe you've had an encounter with the silent watcher too. Story 4, The Terrifying Night at Home. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah Williams, an ordinary woman living in a quiet neighborhood. My husband, Tom, and I have been married for 5 years. He's a police officer, and he often works the night shift. I always feel safe when he's around, but nobody could predict what would happen that night. It was a Sunday evening. Tom had been called in for a night shift at the police station, tasked with handling a robbery case and patrolling the area. I was home alone, telling myself everything would be fine. But as night fell, a strange feeling began to creep over me. I tried to ignore it, but things were about to take a turn. Around 9 p.m., I was sitting in the living room, watching a movie to pass the time. That's when my dog started barking loudly from the backyard, a sound that made me uneasy. At first, I thought it might be some small animal passing by, but the barking didn't stop. I got up and looked out the window but saw nothing except darkness. I called Tom to share my unease, but he didn't pick up. Moments later, he called me back. Sarah, I'm busy, I'm chasing a suspect right now. Stay inside, don't go out. His words comforted me a little, but the barking only got louder, and I felt something was wrong. I tried to brush off the fear, but then I heard something strange coming from downstairs. It sounded like something had fallen or was being moved. My heart began to race, and I couldn't just sit still anymore. I stood up and went down the stairs to see if anyone was in the house. As I entered the kitchen, I saw the window wide open. Panic rushed through me. I quickly ran back upstairs to grab my phone, but I was too late. A shadow appeared before me at the foot of the stairs. This person said nothing, just stared at me with a cold, threatening look. I tried to stay calm and rushed towards the front door, hoping to get outside to call for help. But as I opened the door, the stranger lunged at me, pushing me violently out. I didn't have time to react, and I tumbled down the stairs, rolling a short distance and landing in the pool. The icy water hit me like a shock, and I struggled to stay above the surface. My heart raced as I realized I couldn't escape. I felt myself slipping under the water, my fear reaching its peak. Just as I thought I might drown, I saw a figure approaching from the outside. It was my neighbor, Dan. He had heard the barking and came over to check. Dan quickly jumped into the pool and pulled me out. The coldness of the water began to fade as I was safe, but I knew in that moment, I had come dangerously close to death. After Dan saved me, he called the police. The rescue teams arrived shortly after, but the intruder had vanished without a trace. The window was open, but there were no signs of forced entry. Everything seemed normal, as if nothing had happened. Tom came home as soon as the incident was reported, and I told him everything. But the police couldn't find any evidence of the intruder. They suspected it might have been a random break-in, but I knew better. Someone had wanted to hurt me, and that thought still haunts me every night. Weeks have passed, but I can't shake the image of that cold stare. Every time I look out the window at night, I can't shake the feeling that someone is watching me. And I can't help but wonder, will the intruder return? Did my story make you feel uneasy or scared? Have you ever felt like you were being watched while you were home alone? Share your thoughts and emotions with me. I'd love to hear what you think about these experiences. Story 5, The Night of Blood. My name is Emily Green, and I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood. My husband, Jack, and I have been married for 6 years. He's an easygoing guy, always hanging out with his friends after work. But that night, I didn't know it would change my life forever. It was a Friday night, and Jack had gone out to a local bar with some friends. I didn't mind, we both needed a break from the routine. I was at home, watching a movie, thinking he'd be back around midnight like he always is. But that night, I had a strange feeling. The clock ticked past midnight, and I started to feel a little uneasy. The house was too quiet. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of something shifting in the house. At first, I thought it might just be the wind, but the noise persisted, like something or someone was moving around. I checked the clock. Jack still wasn't home. I felt my pulse quicken as I stood up from the couch, straining to listen. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, soft but deliberate, coming from the kitchen. I grabbed my phone and called Jack, but the line went straight to voicemail. The noise grew louder, as if someone was walking around in the dark, in my own house. My heart was pounding. I slowly crept down the hallway, and as I reached the kitchen door, I froze. A figure was standing by the back window, rummaging through the drawers. At first, I thought it was Jack, but then the person turned around, and I saw his face, someone I didn't recognize. Before I could scream, he lunged at me, his hand gripping a knife. My instincts kicked in, and I tried to push him away, but he was stronger. The blade sliced through the air, cutting across my arm, and I staggered back in pain, falling to the floor. I could feel the blood pouring from the wound as he advanced toward me. In the chaos, I managed to kick the intruder, but he only became angrier. With one final push, he stabbed me in the side. I gasped in pain, unable to move. The last thing I remember before blacking out was hearing the faint sound of the doorbell ringing, then a blur of faces, my neighbors rushing in, shouting for help. It wasn't until hours later that I woke up in a hospital bed, my body aching, my arm and side bandaged. Jack had finally returned home around 4 a.m., drunk and stumbling. He had no idea what had happened until he found me lying in a pool of blood. I was in and out of consciousness, but when I could talk, I told him what had happened. Jack immediately called the police, and the investigation began. The officer in charge seemed to be taking it seriously, but the attack felt too random to make sense. Why me? A week later, the police caught the intruder. It turned out to be a high school student from a nearby school, someone who lived only a few blocks away from us. He had been in trouble before, but nobody knew he was capable of such violence. He had broken into our house, thinking it was an easy target. But when I woke up and caught him in the act, it turned into something worse. After everything settled down, I couldn't shake the fear that lingered in my mind. Jack and I decided to move away from the house to start fresh, but the nightmares and the fear still haunted me. Every time the doorbell rang or I heard footsteps in the hall, my heart would race. As for Jack, he couldn't shake the guilt. That night, when he came home drunk, he felt like he couldn't protect me. He promised me that he would never go out drinking until the early hours of the morning again. But no matter how much we tried to move on, that night always stuck with us. The thought of the intruder, his cold, emotionless face kept me awake at night. Sometimes, I wonder, could it have been worse? Could he have done more to hurt me? Have you ever experienced a moment where you felt completely powerless? Or a time when your life was completely altered by something so unexpected? Let me know your thoughts and emotions after hearing my story. I'm curious to hear how you would have reacted in my place. Thank you for joining us on Whispers in the Dark True Horror Stories. If you found these stories chilling and want more, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss an eerie tale. Share your own experiences with us in the comments, and tell us about the strange occurrences you've faced when home alone. We'll be back with more spine-tingling stories. Until then, stay tuned and remember, the darkness is always closer than you think.